Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new video. Now one concept that gets requested a lot is overnight flipping videos. And I have made one in the past, but I thought I would maybe make an updated one for 2019 as the type of offers that I leave in overnight change pretty frequently based on how the market is going, how much money I have, and some other factors. So today I'm going to be making a guide on choosing which items to put in overnight, how much money you should invest in these items, and just showing you guys the best way to be profitable as things are always changing. And you know what also should be changing frequently is your RuneScape password. As many of you know, RuneScape accounts are frequently targeted by hackers. I currently have around 50 individual accounts. Don't ask me why, and I seriously struggle to remember the login information for all of them. That's why I'm really excited to announce that Dashlane is sponsoring today's video. Dashlane is the complete solution to keeping your online identity organized and secure. If you're like me, you've probably created hundreds of online accounts throughout the years. With Dashlane, you can store this information in a convenient and secure location, allowing you to replace old and outdated passwords. Dashlane includes a suite of password management tools, including a secure autofill feature that is going to save you a lot of time when logging in online, a VPN with country selection, so you're not like me and stuck on Canadian Netflix all the time, and one of my favorite features, a monitoring service for database breaches. 2 years ago, I actually did have my information leaked via a database breach, and someone stole over 50 million GP from my RuneScape account. Having this monitoring service could have saved my RuneScape account and a big headache at the same time. To give Dashlane a try for free on your first device, go to dashlane.com/flipping. And if you would like to upgrade to premium to use Dashlane across all of your devices and get unlimited password storage, use my code FLIPPING to get 10% off. And thank you to Dashlane for sponsoring today's video. Now, one thing a lot of people mention or associate with overnight flipping is bot dump flipping or bot dumps overnight. Now, the theory is that bots more often than not will dump all of their resource items overnight, as there is less of a likelihood for them to be banned by a JMod. As far as I'm aware, there is no proof of this, although it does make sense, and as a lot of items would be coming into the game all at once, the price would dip momentarily in the nighttime. Now, people will try to take advantage of this by putting in lower offers than normal, and they'd be hoping to snag some of the more popular botting items at a lower price. Now, I don't know if this is true or not, but I think a larger factor at play is just the general fluctuation of the player counts overnight. Now, when players are asleep in some of these more popular regions like the UK or North America, the amount traded for most of these items is going to lower, and when the item has a lower volume, the spread on the margin tends to get much larger, which would enable generally larger margins and the ability to snag the item at a lower price than normal. I personally think this is the main reason that people see success with overnight flipping and getting things at a lower price than normal. Now, with all that said, let's jump into how I personally do it. Now, when I'm considering what items I want to put in overnight, there are a few factors that are important. First up here is how much money do you have to invest. If you only have a couple mil, the item choices are going to be drastically different than when you have 300 or 400 mil. Now, you can do both high volume items and high margin items, and I would recommend trying both of them. However, in the past couple of months, I personally have had much more success with high volume items. Now, I think one reason why I tend to favor high volume items and have had much more success with them comes down to them just naturally having a higher return on investment. Now, the reason that they do often have a higher return on investment is because they are bottlenecked by their buy-in limits, which means that people can only invest a certain amount of money into most of these items. And on top of that, cheaper items just generally tend to have a better ROI. Now, the reason I think that these can be really powerful overnight is you actually have a lot of time at your disposal. If you are sleeping like a normal human being and maybe getting 8 hours of sleep, you could theoretically buy 3 times the buy-in limit for most items. For example, if you put an offer in for cannonballs at midnight and you go to bed, you will buy 7,000 cannonballs almost immediately, and then you'll have to wait 4 hours until 4 a.m. At 4 a.m. your buy-in limit will reset and you'll get up to 14,000. You'll have to wait another 4 hours, and then at 8 a.m. your buy-in limit will reset a third time, and you'll hopefully buy another 7,000 of them, bringing you up to 21,000, and it only taken roughly 8 or 9 hours. Now, obviously that isn't an ideal scenario. Often you won't get the entire offer filled overnight. However, being able to invest 3 times potentially the buy-in limit for high volume items with a good return on investments makes it for a very efficient use of your money. Now let's have a look at some live examples right now on GE Tracker. Now where I generally start is on the GE Tracker high volume page. Now no, these exact margins are probably not going to be correct as the item price changes so frequently, but what this often means is this item has a high degree of volatility at the current time. Now this can be really useful information to know, but you do want to take this with a grain of salt and do a little more research into each individual item that you choose. Now I have just pulled a few items up here. First up is the burnt page. Now when you're looking for overnight flips, the one thing you want to avoid is overpaying for that item. Now that might sound obvious, but it's pretty easy to do without a bit of research. For example, we have the burnt page open right now and the margin looks pretty good and consistent. If an item has a consistent margin, it is more likely that we'll be able to buy all 3 buy limits overnight. However, this item is kind of a trap because if we pull it back to the week view, we can see that just in the last day or so, the item has increased pretty dramatically in price. Now these kind of price bubbles happen very frequently and I would avoid them almost always. Most of the time you're going to get burnt. And the risk is way too high, especially if you're going to leave the item in overnight and you won't be awake to change it if something goes wrong. Alright, let's look at another item here. Next up we have the grimy renard weed. Now the daily margin isn't as consistent as the other item, however if we go back to the week graph we can see that there's actually a really big dip right now. Even though the margin on this item right now is fairly low at only 30 GP, for a 7000 GP item I think it's worth taking the risk. If we go back to the month graph we can see that it's at a monthly low. I think this would be a good calculated risk at a margin that could get a lot larger. And last up here we have the blue dragon hide. On the daily graph it looks nice. There's a very consistent flat margin going across the entire day. And I would look to buy it at maybe around 1760, which would give us around a 20 GP margin. And if we go back to the week graph, we can see that the price is dipped quite a bit in the last 24 hours, which again, I think is worth taking a risk on. And a 20 GP margin on an item this price isn't bad to begin with, but with the extra potential of it raising up a pretty significant amount, I think this would be another good overnight investment. Now, generally when I put a offer in overnight, I put the buy offer in for the lowest consistent blue dots on the graph. For example, here around maybe 1755. There is about 4 data points at that amount, so I think it's likely that it could be bought for that price. And then we'll try to sell it for 1775, which is around a 20 GP margin. Right here is a really nice example of a really successful overnight flip for a high volume item. We did the rune dart and we sold them for around 10,085 and we bought them for 10,031. That already is a pretty good margin for rune darts, but we also did double the buying limit overnight, which means we made over 1 million GP in profit just off of that single item. And next up here we have high margin items. Now definitely doable. I generally prefer the very slow high margin items, and the reason for that is if you try to do something like an abyssal whip overnight or archer's ring overnight, for one, the item's price is bound to change very quickly, so you'll either buy none of them or you'll buy all of them and just break even or lose money. And just in general, those items don't have very good margins. They're good for actively flipping because you can do them very quickly and get okay returns and move on to something else, but I don't think they are very good overnight flips. So to really take advantage of the time you're going to be away from your computer, you either need to do something really slow that will naturally just take a long time to buy. You have to find a high margin item that happens to have a higher limit. Something like the obsidian plate body comes to mind, has a limit of 70. Just the other day I was able to flip over 40 of these set combinations overnight. Or even going for some of the higher volume clue scroll rewards can be pretty good, as the margins can stay consistent for longer periods of time. Now, when I'm trying to find a high margin item to put in overnight, you really have to take care in which item you are choosing, as I've gotten burnt on high margin items overnight a lot. Similar to high volume items, you want to check the week graph as well as the month graph to make sure there isn't a big price bubble that you're in right now. And another trend I'm kind of avoiding or looking for is just a general downward or upward trend. Like for example, on the arcane prayer scroll, it has been decreasing in price for the entire month. For whatever reason, I have found that high margin items tend to follow longer trends, so they'll just be decreasing in price for a very long period of time, or increasing in price as well. If we go down to the week graph, it looks pretty consistent, so it wouldn't be a terrible choice, as there doesn't seem to be a ton of volatility over the last week. So we definitely have a nice consistent baseline at around 41.75, and we can sell it for hopefully 4,300 or 42.25, somewhere around there. So I'm gonna put it in for 41.80, and we'll go ahead and do 9, I guess. Okay, let's have a quick look at a few more items here. We have the Torag armor set. Looks pretty good for the day graph. No huge movement. Graph, again, pretty consistent. And the month graph, actually very consistent. I would consider doing the Torag armor set as well. Currently, it has around a 40k margin, which is very, very good for its price. That is another really good example of an awesome margin on an item that is going to be consistent. And lastly here, another item I actually had in my offer slot is the Guardian boot. Once again, we can see a very consistent baseline price at around 51.50 and a varying degree of selling prices at around 51.80, even upwards of 5200. Next up, I'll pull it back to the week. Well, we can see very consistent, maybe a very minor downward trend, but nothing major. And bringing it back to the month graph, we can see it is on a downward trend, but nothing too alarming. I would invest in this item, and well, I have. Now here is another really good example of a recent set of flips I did overnight. A lot of variety here. We did Dragon Dart tips, which gave us a really good margin of around 80 GP overnight, and we got the full buy-in limit. It took a while to come through, but we did overnight, so it was fine. We did some slower items like the Primordial Crystal and the Crystal Tool Seed. The reason they are good to do overnight is just because of how slow they actually come through. We weren't close to hitting the buy-in limit or anything, but just a really slow item. We have the ornament kits, which we get a benefit from because the buy-in limit is so low, only 4 on each one of those. So the ornament kits generally have a higher margin just because of their low limit. And we had a couple other items, a really successful overnight flip session, and we got around 2 or 3 mil in profit. That is the way I like to do it, mixing up high volume and high margin items overnight. I don't usually stick to a singular type of item, but the most important thing is to make sure you check the item's prices, historical prices, before you put it in overnight, because that is a long period of time, and if you've picked a bad item, you can easily lose quite a bit of money. Anyway guys, that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, don't forget to leave the video a like. I always appreciate it, and I will see you next time.